Barely 24 hours after that 50% tariff was slapped on India and it came into effect, you've had another provocation by America. What is it this time? Well, it's clear India has refused to bow down to Trump's tariff. So America and the leadership at least seems to be rather frustrated. The top advisors are now taking aim at India, mocking India repeatedly, questioning diplomacy, mocking its currency, even dubbing the Ukraine war now as Modi's war. This is the statement that's come in from Peter Navarro, a top Trump aide. He's the White House advisor. Relations clearly are under strain, and that's clear looking at what's been happening in the last many days. But the question remains at this point, on what terms can any talks really continue between India and US on a trade deal? We can confirm for you that yes, the talks are happening because that's something government sources have told us. But with these kind of non-stop insults coming in from the likes of Peter Navarro, how really is this going to move forward? Because India isn't taking this lightly.
For US President Donald Trump, the sweeping 50% tariffs on Indian exports were just the opening shot. Barely a day after the punitive tariff wall went up, his lieutenants unleashed a verbal crossfire at New Delhi, turning diplomacy into a barrage of broadsides. From branding ties a complicated relationship to rechristening the Ukraine war as Modi's war, and even ridiculing the Indian rupee.
I will put charges and costs and tariffs onto them that will be many times more than what they're going to be paying.
The barrage by Trump's inner circle has been unprecedented.
Yeah, I think that it is a complicated relationship, that it's integrated some with the problems that we're trying to put extra pressure on Russia so that we could get a peace deal to save millions of lives, and the Indian intransigence about opening their markets to our products. And so I think that when you're looking at trade negotiations, one thing I think we've all learned is that you need to keep your eyes on the horizon and recognize that there are going to be ebbs and flows in things before we reach the final position. And if the Indians don't budge, I don't think President Trump will either.
In rapid-fire statements, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent echoed Hassett, calling India ties complicated and venting frustration at stalled trade talks. He scoffed at the very idea of the rupee challenging the dollar, likening it to a paper boat in a storm, and mocked its slide to record lows. Policy hawk Peter Navarro went further, accusing India of bankrolling Russia's war machine, branding New Delhi arrogant and even mocking its democracy. He dubbed the Ukraine conflict Modi's war while slamming Indian tariffs as a tax on American jobs and taxpayers.
There was a hope that the special Modi-Trump relationship would yield something even better, but at least we would not look worse if that had played out.
Ironically, the American fusillade came just as India had signaled a softer line. Government sources told Business Today TV that dialogue lines remain open. Concerns are on the table, and both nations know the tariffs cut both ways. But the latest US salvo is expected to further erode confidence within the Indian establishment as regards US intentions.
They are unreasonable, unjustified, and unfair. But our economy is strong enough. Our government will protect the interests of our country. And we will continue to look at markets for all resources because we have a very large population whose energy security also has to be addressed.
Meanwhile, a report by EY says India is projected to become the world's second largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity by 2038, despite US tariffs. The GDP is expected to cross $34 trillion, with the report adding that India is emerging as one of the most dynamic among the world's 5 largest economies. The report cited India's strong economic fundamentals, including high savings and investment rates, favorable demographics, and a sustainable fiscal position. At home, the external threat has triggered a rallying cry for Swadeshi. Political, business and social leaders alike digging trenches for a long battle.
सब बातों की कुंजी है, विकास भी करना है तो हर बात में अपना देश आत्मनिर्भर होना चाहिए, अपने घर से शुरू करना। जब ये स्वदेशी की बात करते हैं तो लगता है कि विदेशों से संबंध नहीं रहेंगे व्यापार, ऐसा नहीं है। आत्मनिर्भर होना यानी बाकी लोगों को बंद करना नहीं है, आत्मनिर्भर होना है, लेकिन दुनिया परस्पर निर्भरता पर चलती है।
Yet Trump can claim credit for thawing at least one frozen front. While India denies the US president's claimed role in the May ceasefire with Pakistan, the mercurial dealmaker has nudged New Delhi and Beijing closer. As Prime Minister Modi prepares to retrace the historic Silk Route to Beijing, the India-China equation looks set to warm even as the India-US axis comes under strain. Bureau Report, Business Today Television.
So now the latest comment that's come in from a Trump aide, Peter Navarro, is where he refers to the Russia-Ukraine war as Modi's war. And then if you listen to the detailed statement in an interview that he's made, he makes comments referring to India as arrogant, saying that we're refusing to step down as far as trade talks go. But there will be questions really about whether this is actually Modi's war or whether this is something that US had a role to play in way more than India did. Remember that it was over NATO that all of this even kicked off, this war. US's attempts to get Ukraine in NATO triggered that particular conflict. And constantly there's been criticism that's gone America's way of NATO expansionism, at least of the previous government, the previous regime in America, of a NATO expansionism mindset. And Vladimir Putin, Russia, went ahead with that invasion, citing exactly this. They got the perfect excuse because of America. America has also been accused of interfering in Ukraine politics. Remember that what Russia is doing right now of invading Ukraine, which Trump has categorically gone ahead and condemned, at least now. Previously, of course, we've seen how he's spoken about ending the conflict, but has also been very, very careful as far as dealing with Russia goes. US repeatedly has also carried out similar operations, referring to it as a need of the hour, security, democracy, whatnot. So many examples come to mind, including, of course, think Iraq. But let me bring in right now Geeta Mohan, a foreign affairs editor, and Pranay Upadhyay, editor of India Today Global, both of whom are joining us. Geeta, I'd like to begin with you on what really this means when Navarro makes these kind of statements. Look, it almost is as if we've reached a point of no return when these kind of provocative statements are being made one after the other by America.
Well, Akshita, it's very plain and simple. The American history and their own records is something that Peter Navarro should be looking at. Peter Navarro has had an anti-India bias for years, and that reflects in all the statements that he's made and how he's advising the US president. Having said that, look, what happened, like you very nicely explained, the NATO expansion was the reason why Russia went in. Who was prompting Ukraine into that NATO expansion, and who was prompting Ukraine into joining the NATO? It was none other than the United States of America. So maybe it's not Biden, it's Trump, but he should wake up and look at his own records, look at what the United States of America has been doing, rather than blame Modi. What was Modi's first statement after the war broke out? This is not an era of war. And he's always urged diplomacy and dialogue between Russia and Ukraine to resolve this entire conflict.
Oh, very true. And this is something, of course, that we've repeatedly highlighted on India Today. The number of statements that India has put out since the conflict began, saying there must be peace. We're on the side of peace. I want to bring in Pranay Upadhyay of India Today Global as well on this. Pranay, you know, in the face of so many of these kind of very loose statements being made by Team Trump on India, India's, or in contrast, and a very, very sharp contrast at that, put up a very matured stand. At this point, looking at what Navarro has said, how is India really viewing it? How is the government viewing it? Are we expecting some sort of a response, Pranay?
Look, the government of India has already given its response. And look, we do not believe in playing the politics in public galleries. If you see the measured statement given by the government of India, Ministry of External Affairs, President Donald Trump might have given umpteen statement, targeting about the Russian oil, about India, about the tariffs. But look, there has been no statement from the leadership of India, except that the Prime Minister of India and the government of India will always protect the national interest, which is a very right statement to state at any platform or any forum for that matter. But having said that, Akshita, we have to see here that it is United States which has changed. Geeta has rightly pointed out that India has consistently maintained its position as far as the Russia-Ukraine conflict is concerned. It is the United States which has changed its position. They were the one who helped. They wanted Ukraine to join NATO, and now they have changed their position. See the US position vis-a-vis Russia itself. And we cannot discount the position or the statement given by the Russian President Vladimir Putin from Anchorage in Alaska, where in the presence of US President Donald Trump, he said that there has been 20% increase in the bilateral trade of Russia and United States since President Donald Trump has assumed office. What does it signify? It clearly signifies that US is trading with Russia, but they want to punish India for the oil purchase, which was appreciated by the previous US administration. And
Correct.
we have to see the US establishment, US bureaucracy is the same. So we have to see, to factor in that it is the United States which is keep changing its position, and that's why we are taking it, very patiently. We are open to have an conversation, to have engagement with the United States. It is for the United States to join that conversation.
And it's interesting really to see how India is dealing with this. On one hand, you have the unpredictability factor, but through that, India's stood firm that, we're not going to budge on any of our demands. We're not going to budge and come to any sort of middle ground just because America continues to act rather erratically, or at least the leadership does. Thanks very much, Geeta and Pranay, for joining us with your insights, your perspective of what's really playing out. Let's call out really why we're seeing these kind of statements happening. I showed you previously on how US perhaps also has a big role to play in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, of constantly needling, and that led to the war. But why are we seeing these kind of comments by America against India? Why is US so frustrated? A couple of issues that they've had, and these are issues, by the way, on which India has refused to budge, saying our interests come first, which is how it should be. First, that Prime Minister Modi hasn't budged on buying Russian oil. We've said our interests come first, and that's why we will continue our Russian oil imports. There's no question of buckling under any pressure from America. This hasn't gone down well with the White House. The fact that all of their attempts at slapping tariffs at us hasn't changed our stand on this. And we've ignored those tariffs. We're continuing our trade with Russia. As Prime Minister Modi himself said, that we will look out for our nation, and that's what we're doing. And so that's something that's clearly irked the Trump administration. And mind you, the other aspect of this is that Trump has been wanting credit for ending wars. I've seen that repeated examples, at least 30 plus examples that I can give you of the kind of comments that he's made. He's failed so far to broker peace between Russia and Ukraine. It's almost as if he's taking that out now on India, trying to drag India into this, trying to ensure that that puts pressure on Russia. Again, something that hasn't worked so far, and India's made it clear it's not going forward as well. Now, the other aspect of this is that US is also watching that while India has said that, no, look, our stand is very clear, India-China ties are quietly growing. And we know, of course, of the animosity between China and America. But at the same time, mind you, America doesn't dare to go ahead and slap tariffs on China. India and China ties are quietly growing deeper. Prime Minister Modi, in just 2 days from now, will be in China for the SCO summit, where he's not just going to be meeting Xi Jinping, he's also going to be meeting with Vladimir Putin. The other issue that the White House has is that there's been no condemnation of Moscow from India. India has made it very clear as far as the conflict goes that we want peace, that any bloodshed is simply unacceptable. But at the same time, we've made it very, very clear that whatever it takes to end this conflict is what we stand for. Russia is still a very close ally of India, and that doesn't change. US also is losing its influence in the global south. With what it's done as far as India goes, with its ties currently with China, with Russia, America is struggling right now to have allies. India was, of course, a very strong ally, but at this point, with the kind of comments that have come in, there's sharp criticism going Trump's way that he has caused irreparable damage to the India-America story. Now, there's been a lot of criticism, like I said, of how Trump has handled this. Listen in to one top economist in America who's lashed out at Trump, saying that he's attempting to bully India.
what you just showed us, Ambassador Barak in Lebanon, that's the United States talking to a small Mideastern country. That's not India. India is now, according to the United Nations, by population, the largest country on earth, having outgrown China, which used to have that position. If you do what the United States, what Mr. Trump is doing with these threats against India, who has a long historical relationship with Russia going back to the days of the Soviet Union and ever since, you are playing with a very different adversary. If you shut off the United States to India by big tariffs, India will have to find other places to sell its exports. But like Russia found another place to buy its, to sell its energy, India will sell its exports no longer to the United States, but to the rest of the BRICS. And what you're doing is you're hothouse fashion developing the BRICS to be an ever larger, more integrated and successful economic alternative to the West. We are watching, as you put it, a historic moment, but it will be, for those with some humor, it will be the spectacle of the United States acting like it's the world's tough guy, as what it actually does is shoot itself in the foot.
Scathing criticism there of Donald Trump. But let me bring in Michael Kugelman, Senior Fellow of the Asia Pacific Foundation, who's joining me on this broadcast. Michael, thank you very much for your time. First of all, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what Peter Navarro has said when he refers to the Russia-Ukraine war as Modi's war.
Well, I mean, to me, among other things, it just does not work factually in the sense that Prime Minister Modi has repeatedly stated his opposition to the war. In one case, he essentially told Vladimir Putin while sitting next to him that the war has to end. So to describe this as Modi's war, I mean, it seems to fly in the face of the facts. But I think that what we're seeing here is just another step of another phase of this ongoing pressure campaign on the part of the Trump administration to try to get India to cut back on its ties with Russia in order to pressure Russia to agree to end its fighting in Ukraine.
Sure. But do you also, Michael, you referred to this as a pressure campaign, but is this more than just that? Because this almost seems like, targeting of India, that they're out to go ahead and constantly belittle, target India. What do you make of that?
No, I think that unfortunately it's become outright insults. I mean, that's really what we're hearing. And there've of course been other examples when the president described India's economy as a dead economy, and it's just so staggering in the sense that we're seeing this type of rhetoric coming from the U.S. and an administration that had been so positive in its messaging toward India. I mean, we remember that when the second Trump administration took office, the first few weeks, even the first few months of Trump's term, a lot of positivity about the relationship with India. And, of course, when Prime Minister Modi was in Washington to meet with the president, the two leaders agreed to pursue trade talks. And, at that time, there was an expectation that the talks would be difficult, but that they would get a deal. Who would have thought that we get to a point now where the administration is seemingly on a daily basis insulting India and its tariffs, among other things?
But, that's what leads me to question, Michael, whether we've reached a point now of no return. On one hand, this entire exchange and what we've seen in the last few weeks does lead to a trust deficit for India and America. Then add to it, coupled with that, is a creeping sense of constant unpredictability.
Well, I mean, of course, the Indian External Affairs Minister some days ago said that the talks are still on just because no one said that they're not on. But the fact that that talks that were supposed to happen this week were called off by the U.S., I think is very troubling. And with the tariffs, with the 50% tariffs now in effect, I think that's going to be very difficult to move forward on the trade front. And I would also say that I think that India will face significant domestic political pressure if it were to make any more concessions. It's made a number of concessions to the administration already, and given how angry so many are in India about the Trump administration, and I think that there could be political cost to India if it were to make more concessions. But making more concessions is exactly what the U.S. would demand of India if talks were to begin. And so if there's going to be a deal, I think that there would need to be more concessions coming from the Indian side.
Well, at this point, that looks unlikely, at least based on what we have heard. India's made it very clear that we're not looking to go anywhere beyond where we've already gone. You were also right, Michael, in highlighting that dialogue is on. But I do wonder what kind of dialogue can actually happen in this kind of an atmosphere of these kind of insults constantly being hurled. But do you think that by doing that at a time when apparently dialogue is happening, America is kind of shooting itself in the foot?
It's definitely shooting itself in the foot. I mean, the expression I've used is that India is committing so many own goals. Pardon me, the U.S. is committing so many own goals in this regard. I mean, it's doing things that are destined to not go down well in India. And the U.S., I think, does at the end of the day still see India as a close partner. But, you know, this is not a country that you want to be pressuring via insultry. You know, maybe that works when it comes to some countries, but I think we all know that it's not going to work with India. And again, the fact that India has already done a lot to address U.S. concerns. It's already reduced and eliminated a number of tariffs. It's done a number of other things. It's been importing a lot more importing a lot more American oil over the last few years than it was, say, in previous decades. So, you know, I think that in that sense, to get hit by these insults, it's insulting, clearly, from an Indian perspective, and one can understand why.
Do you think also that, America is trying here not just to aim and hit out at India, but also at Russia, to kind of target those who buy from Russia rather ruthlessly, in this case, India, Michael?
Yeah, that is a very big reason here for what's going on. I mean, it's very clear that from the day he took office in his second term, President Trump wanted to end wars. He's tried to end the war in Gaza. He's not succeeded yet. He really wants to end the war in Ukraine. And he has been frustrated that the Russian side has not been more inclined to agree to a ceasefire. And now, of course, the Trump administration is instead pursuing a wider peace deal. Very difficult to do that. But yes, I think that he feels that if he pressures one of Russia's top commercial partners to back away from Russia, that maybe that'll make Russia want to stop fighting. I don't think that's the case, but of course it goes beyond that, because as we know, China is importing much more Russian oil than India is at this point. And the Trump administration has not criticized China for importing Russian oil. It has not put tariffs on China for importing Russian oil. And so I think that brings back the focus to India. And I would argue that President Trump himself feels personally aggrieved by some of the ways that the Indian government has treated him as well. And I think this also might be a reflection of how the U.S. views China, and particularly its economy, compared to how it views the Indian economy. I think that the U.S. has concluded that if it were to put more tariffs on China, if it were to take really harsh steps against China as it is with India, that could end up hurting the U.S. economy, whereas it feels it can get away with more economically from a U.S. perspective if it puts these very drastic measures on India. I don't know if that's right or not, but I do think that helps explain why India is getting singled out for this special treatment when it comes to the tariffs on India for its imports of Russian oil.
What's very, very clear right now, looking at the statements that are coming, that's coming in, the action that's being taken, is that Trump has it out for India. And at a time when, things for China, many would say the atmosphere is in such a way that US perhaps could have done the same to China. They've chosen not to, instead lash out at India repeatedly. Thank you very much, Michael, for joining us with your analysis of what's really going on in these constant insults that are coming in from America, hurled at India's way. But I also want to highlight for you how in America itself there seems to be so much confusion over what really lies ahead, what's going to happen next as far as these tariffs go and the talks between India and America. There are two statements on your screens. One by Scott Bessent, who is the US Treasury Secretary, versus Kevin Hassett, who is the US Economic Advisor. And there couldn't be a sharper contrast than this. Scott Bessent says that there is a possibility of a deal. India, US will come together, and the issue goes beyond just Russian oil. As far as Kevin Hassett goes, the US Economic Advisor, he says that Trump won't budge if India won't. So you see the difference there in the two statements, and these are again two top aides of Donald Trump, and that itself tells you the endless confusion right now in the American leadership on what really needs to be done, because they perhaps didn't see this coming, that India would so resolutely stand its ground and say very clearly that, look, there is no way that we're going to be going ahead and stopping any of the buying or purchase of oil from Russia, or for that matter, even on the trade deal. So we're going to continue tracking all the statements that come in. At one side, you have, of course, all of this tariff tyranny, as we've been calling it here in India today, continuing by Trump. And on the other, there's been a lot of talk about how India is now looking to newer markets. Prime Minister Modi, India seemed to be garnering support from BRICS Asian countries as well. Tonight, Prime Minister Modi will be headed to Japan. He will be on a two-nation trip for days, perhaps the most crucial of 2025. First stop is Tokyo, Japan. Again, crucial ally for India. And then it's over to China in Tianjin for the SCO summit. Prime Minister Modi, it's been confirmed now, will be meeting for a bilateral with President Xi Jinping. So the first since the Galwan clash. And importantly, again, at the sidelines of the summit, he will also be having a bilateral with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Huge messaging involved here for America.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is reaching out to the east when the US tries to corner India with tariffs and sanctions. On 29th August, the Indian Prime Minister will embark on a 4-day trip of two nations, Japan and then China. But it is the second leg of the trip that is more in the limelight. Prime Minister Modi is scheduled to attend the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or SCO summit at Tianjin in China. On the sidelines of the summit on 31st August, the Prime Minister and the Chinese President Xi Jinping are expected to hold a bilateral meeting.
At this moment of turbulence and change, the significance of China-India relations has become increasingly evident. China-India cooperation benefits both countries. China and India are important neighbors, major developing countries, and emerging economies. And both are at a critical stage of national development and rejuvenation.
Moscow and Beijing founded Regional Security Club. SCO is aimed at reshaping the global balance of power, when a thaw in India and China's fractious relationship is already underway. The meeting of the two Asian giants in either of these soils since 2020 Galwan border disputes is the big step forward.
China has resumed the visits of Indian pilgrims to the sacred mountain and the lake in Xizang of China, and India has resumed issuing tourist visas to Chinese citizens. In coming days, Prime Minister Modi will travel to Tianjin to attend the SCO summit. I believe this visit will inject new impetus to the improvement and development of China-India relations.
The very next day, on 1st September, Prime Minister Modi will be meeting Russian President Vladimir Putin. Again, a very crucial meeting, as India at present is being prosecuted by Washington for buying Russian crude oil. But before this crucial SCO meeting, Prime Minister Modi will participate in the 15th India-Japan Annual Summit in Tokyo between 29 to 30th August. India looks forward to forge stronger ties with the Nippon. Quad grouping is an important platform on the agenda for talks between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba.
India and Japan are two important countries in Indo-Pacific, two very important countries in Quad. So when they meet, they would be discussing about, the leadership would be discussing about the geopolitical situation and also the geo-economic situation. So definitely all these issues will come up during the talks.
In 4 days, Prime Minister will be meeting 3 crucial state heads of the world today to talk business of security, trade and economy, technology and innovation, and people-to-people exchanges. Between August 29th and 1st September, Prime Minister Modi, Prime Minister Ishiba, President Jinping and President Putin will discuss issues of regional and global importance. A world order of the time of their own paradigm. Bureau Report, India Today.
You can trust us here on India Today to get you every single live update that comes in from that very crucial visit of the Prime Minister, first to Japan and then the all-important one in China.